Hello there, my name is Wally Whitaker, and today we will be discussing the nutritive food business, particularly highlighting the innovations and challenges that are faced by the nutritive food business in South Africa. We do have a case study that we're going to kind of delve into as well, and we're going to try and attempt to talk about the opportunities available in the food nutritive business in South Africa. So let's just give it a brief introduction here. There is a general consensus in the world that food is not generally accessible, which is kind of a problem. And in some instances, it's actually overly accessible. South Africa is not an exception to many of these problems, and it is estimated by some experts that the food and nutritive food business in South Africa could potentially thrive. Do you know why? Because it is estimated that approximately 30 million South Africans do not have access to good quality food. This is estimates by Food for South Africa. It is also very expensive to have nutritive foods, and this is probably where the main challenge is. However, the food industry could potentially come in play here, particularly the nutritive food industry. It is important to note that the market research analysis on the food nutritive industry estimate the industry to be worth at approximately $5 billion. It's quite a whopping amount of money. And the compound annual growth rate is estimated to be at 9.9%. So that is something that's very big, particularly when you're looking at the outlook by 2030. That's rather large. So what does the nutritive food industry look like in South Africa? From a South African perspective, particularly, let's bring it back down to the local scene. First and foremost, you have to understand that most of the nutritive food comes from agricultural produce. And South Africa is largely blessed with arable lands. And as that allows us, as South Africans, to develop a large farming scheme. And what do we mean by farming? We have lots of plants that are grown indigenously in South Africa: maize, millet, sorghum. Think of all of these plants that are produced locally in South Africa. On top of that, because of the vast amount of land and, of course, grazing space, we have the ability to keep a large amount of livestock, be it cattle, goats, or sheep, or pigs, whichever the case may be. Another interesting facet of the South African industry in the food and nutritive space is that the food and processing and manufacturing industry in South Africa is rather developed, which allows for the production of high quality foods. This is something to keep your mind on, particularly when you're trying to get into this kind of a business. Another thing we have to keep in mind with the South African scenario is the fact that there is a challenge when it comes to nutrition, because in South Africa, like many parts of the world, we have challenges with overnutrition and undernutrition. This is kind of a problem. Another thing to keep your mind on in the case of nutritive food in the South African context is the fact that there's a lot of different trends with regards to wellness and health, particularly when it comes towards how people eat. You constantly hear things of vegan diet, you hear things of a keto diet and carnivore diet. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind, particularly in the health and wellness space. Another thing you have to keep in mind is the regulatory environment, because high quality food is often highly regulated. And to produce quality food that is going to be consumed by a lot of people, you have to always navigate the regulatory space correctly. Another thing to keep in mind on, obviously, is the global trade and export. You cannot develop a business and only think local. You have to think global. And so you have to pay attention to the global trends. And these are some of the highlights that we're going to obviously discuss during the course of our conversation. And last but not least, South Africa is the rainbow nation. We know this. And because of that, we've got cultural and culinary diversity. What does this mean for the average South African? What does it mean for the average South African nutritive food business owner? Is that you have to always keep in mind the fact that because South Africa is a melting pot for cultural and anthropological reasons, you have to pay attention that your product may not necessarily cut across all people's palate, but it's something to keep in mind. So what are the recent innovations in the nutritive food business in South Africa specifically, or in general? Another one thing to keep in mind, obviously, is this functional foods. And by functional foods, we mean foods that are easy to use and are actually usable. What do we mean by this? Is if I'm late for a meeting and I need to go and have a meal on the way, it has to be something that's convenient, and functional food comes to mind. Another innovation that is available to most nutritive industry people is that there's a lot of plant-based alternatives. Now you have got things like soy milk, you've got things like almond milk, and a lot of people seem to prefer those over products that are developed from animals. One interesting innovation that comes to mind off the top of my mind is the use of indigenous ingredients. More and more indigenous ingredients becoming more attractive, because now you hear things about people using moringa oil, for instance, for whatever purposes, or the use of hemp, which becomes very interesting because these are indigenous products that have previously not necessarily been looked at favorably. Another one of these innovations, of course, is technology. And technology is something that I'm going to speak about extensively going forward in this particular recording, is because technology has absolutely revolutionized the way we look at things from a general perspective, but from a nutritive food perspective, it has actually revolutionized this space a lot more. When you think of the technology that is used in agriculture, you can now consider the fact that you could actually for instance, be able to fertilize hectares upon hectares of land in a reasonably short amount of time using technologies like drones, which is previously not possible. You also have to consider the fact that technology has made the packaging or the processing of food a lot more efficient. You can use technology in streamlining processes, particularly in the food and nutritive business, and avoiding the spoilage. So this is something that is going to come up a lot during this conversation. And then you have to pay attention to sustainable packaging. Packaging plays a very important role in the nutritive food business and in business in general, because how a package is disposed of at the end of its use is very important. Recently, there's been a very, very large amount of conversation around microplastics and the pollution of the oceans, and indeed the human body being found with high amounts of microplastics in the bloodstream. This could possibly be attributed to the fact that we use packaging that is not very well processed and is not quite sustainable. Technology, again, now comes in here, because now we can develop packaging that is biodegradable, and that means that we are not polluting the earth or indeed poisoning human beings by just simply packaging their foods. This is something that is very, very interesting in terms of the developmental aspects and innovations in the food and nutritive business. Another thing to talk about here is nutritional labeling and transparency. A lot of companies nowadays have the tendency of labeling things as green or vegan, and maybe they may not be. So this is something that's very important, and many customers and consumers are now very vigilant to what they want to eat. So nutritional labeling and packaging is very, very important. These go hand in hand. And the labeling has to be very transparent. I find this very interesting because recently I had the privilege of traveling to Germany. And in Germany, almost every package that you see for food, interestingly enough, is graded A to D. And in some cases can go up to F depending on the quality of the food. And you will notice that those that are graded A are supposedly the most nutritious or the most sustainably produced. And this is something that remains very interesting because a lot of people prefer those kind of things. So this is some of the very interesting innovations that you find in the food and nutritive business. E-commerce and direct consumer models are very, very important because, of course, so nowadays convenience is everything, right? I know, I don't want to leave my house. And then for those reasons, you want to be able to access your nutritive foods directly from the supplier. And in some cases, you want to buy them in bulk. Not only that, it's also very interesting that you want to use e-commerce platforms if you're a nutritive business owner to get it to clients that maybe not necessarily in the closest proximity to you. And this allows you to reach cast a wider net, because in some instances you may not have collaborations with big partners like your Checkers or your ShopRite or your Pick and Pay, and this allows you to be able to reach out to a lot more clientele, and this is very important in any business for that matter. Then comes the last point, which is obviously very important and ties back to the first one, to the previous one, in that collaborations and partnerships are things that are very interesting right now in this space. As a nutritive food business, you want to be collaborating with wellness campaign people or wellness kind of shops in malls, but you also want to be partnering with your large chains like your Pick and Pay and your ShopRite, Checkers, and things like this. So these are the recent innovations that we currently notice in the nutritive food business, which brings us now to the next part of our conversation. And this brings us to the next part of our conversation, which is the challenges that are faced in the nutritive food business. Now, what are the challenges that we face in the nutritive food industry? Primarily, it's food security and the accessibility of food. Food currently is something that is very easy to not get a hold of, unfortunately, and the accessibility there too is also very problematic, particularly if it's a nutritive kind of food. South Africa, like I mentioned earlier, is in a very, very dicey position with regard to malnutrition, because South Africa has a lot of people that are overly nourished and people who are undernourished. So there's a very, very large number of people with comorbidities such as diabetes and hypertension associated with bad eating habits, as well as people who are malnourished. As it currently stands, the statistics look at about 2 out of every 5 children in South Africa are stunted, which is not a great statistic. So it means that the nutritive food business has to come in here and provide a more lasting solution to the potential future of this country, that we need to provide those people with not enough nutrition, with large amounts of nutrition enough for them to survive, as well as those who are having too much of it to be in a position where they can just have right amounts of nutrition. Supply challenges always come in every business, but they're particularly a concern in the nutritive food business, because most of the ingredients have to be sourced usually locally or from a space that is closer by. As you may have paid attention to recently in the news, there's problems with Transnet. So if you're looking at getting your ingredients from outside, then you're in kind of a bit of a pickle. So supply chain challenges, things that have to always be at the back of the mind of an entrepreneur in the nutritive business. But also something to pay attention to is, of course, the nutrition education and awareness amongst people that you're hoping to serve. So generally in South Africa, there's not a very big drive in terms of nutritional education and awareness. In many instances, households and homes just eat what they're traditionally used to eating without understanding whether this is nutritive enough and whether they are meeting the daily dietary needs. And this is very important because if you're not meeting, and of course the dietary needs change, chop and change depending on the type of job that you're in, depending on your daily activities. So of course it's very important to make people aware of the kind of foods that they need for their particular type of work and their particular type of lifestyle. The rising costs and affordability of nutritive foods is a big challenge because of the high cost presently that is associated with developing these products. It is also very, very costly to be able to acquire this, and this probably becomes a challenge to the consumers. But not only this, the challenge in the food industry with the rising costs, obviously, is that the ripple rate keeps going up and the cost of producing nutritive food keeps going up because of things like load shedding. And these are things that you also have to keep in mind when you are in the nutritive food business. Is that, for instance, production cannot come to a grinding halt based off of the fact that there's no electricity, and the use of alternative energy then increases the cost of production, which is 9 times out of 10 passed on to the consumer. Another challenge, of course, is consumer preference. We discussed how South Africa is the melting pot of anthropology and a lot of cultures, different races of people in the country, which is a beautiful thing. It's a cultural melting pot. Unfortunately, this can be a challenge because your nutritive food basic ingredients may not be the most appealing to the whole population. So the nutritive food industry has this challenge, particularly in South Africa, which can then be turned into an opportunity because once you figure out how to play to the palates of many, you then have the ability to reach out to a global audience because the world is generally now becoming one village. Another challenge is obviously the competition and the market saturation, because if you have a very big market like the nutritive business currently is, and we just made the comment of how big this industry is, and looking at a 9% growth, compound growth rate, that's rather large, and a lot of players would want to get in. A big challenge there is that the market could become very competitive. And competition is very important, yes, to increase the quality, which is a good thing for the consumer, but from the entrepreneurial side, that could be a problem. The market could also tend to get saturated because bigger players and more players want to get into this space, which is very important. Then you consider the global economic factors. For the business to grow, obviously, you want to delve into different economies and want to put your product in different countries. But of course, that depends on the economic situation on their side. So if the global economy is downturn, then you find yourself in a position where you may not be able to export your products to these kind of economies. So now we had a conversation, luckily enough, we had a conversation with one of the CEOs of a company that does nutritive food. And this company, CEO of Nutrigo. You can click on the link to the site up here, and then you can have you can hear how the conversation went. But generally, just to break it down for you in a kind of a nutshell, is the Nutrigo is a very new company. It's a spin-off from a university, and so the company has been in existence for almost 2 years. It was established based on grants, which is kind of cool because then their capital costs were kind of dealt with by grants. And because they are tied to a university, they pride themselves on being able to use technologies that are at the forefront of technological advances because they're using university resources. The food product that they produce is called Nicello, which is a competitor of Mahel based on sorghum and millet. And the Nutrigo product has addressed some of the challenges that we actually spoke about. Particularly, they have challenges with their access to the market. So they're using a very uncharacteristic style of getting their product to the market because they are targeting the much lower economic value people who are not earning billions of monies are the people that they're targeting. The CEO does highlight here in this conversation how, for instance, taxi drivers are their go-to because the Nicello is a product that is a food on the go. So it is convenient for professionals that are constantly on the move. And he highlights that this was deliberate because they were looking to get into that market, and they figured that that's the easier place to penetrate because most of the nutritional foods do not target those kind of population, which is very interesting to me. He also highlights how he's targeted and partnered with the Rotary Club, for instance, in providing these meals to orphanages and people of underprivileged status, which is kind of good because it kind of speaks into the corporate social responsibility of the institution, but also highlights how nutrition is a very important factor and how those people may not have access to it. He does lament, however, on the fact that the cost of producing this product is rather high, and to produce it at scale is going to be even more complicated and a little bit more challenging. So again, these are some of the items that we've already highlighted in our conversation thus far. I urge you to have the time to listen to the case study because it's very, very interesting. And some of the challenges that he highlights are things that I'm going to speak about in the next coming slide, because the company has prided itself on certain elements of innovation. And in the opinion of mine, I think they've actually targeted and hit a lot of high notes in the innovation space. So in the next slide, I'm just going to talk about how the general innovations in the food and nutritive industry, and then tie it back into what the CEO of Nicelo actually highlighted in their specific case. So what are the opportunities in the nutritive food space? So the opportunities, for instance, are in the production and innovation space. You want to produce new products. In the case of Nicelo, they actually jumped onto this opportunity very well because they realized that sorghum is something that is readily consumed in many African countries, but is not exactly processed for the purposes of nutrition. They then tie this in with a very innovative touch because they are a spin-off from a school of pharmacy, so they obviously understand a lot of these technical items regarding the production and formulation of drugs, and apply this technology to the development of a food nutritive product by adding what are called probiotics. Probiotics are very, very good for the gut, and so the product that Nicelo is now peddling is of the highest quality in terms of that it improves gut health, and of course it has nutritional value in the fact that it has got sorghum, which then ties back into the innovation of obviously speaking towards general customer acceptability and preferences. Sorghum and millet are largely consumed in the not so affluent parts of South Africa, particularly in traditional beers, and Nicelo jumped on this by creating a nutritive drink that is based on these plants without, of course, the alcoholic touch to it. Then the opportunity, of course, is novelty foods. Everyone wants to eat something that's new, and novelty foods are one of those things. Nicelo actually jumped on this opportunity by providing something that's novel in that it's a probiotic / drink, so it kind of falls under the nutraceutical umbrella. So it does have nutritional value as well as some pharmaceutical behavior in it, and it's developed as such. So that's something that's novelty. The utilization of e-commerce is something that's very, very important in the nutritive food space and in business in general. And it's a very big opportunity in the nutritive food space. It's obviously when your product is readily available and can be purchased online, it actually increases the amount of people that you can reach. Then there's the use of AI. Again, AI is something that is absolutely, absolutely incredible. Presently, with the fourth industrial revolution and all the possible things that you can do with AI, it's absolutely not an opportunity to miss. Some of the ways that you can use AI, for instance, is in the search engine optimization space. You could actually create a website that your company has, and then you're using AI, you can actually optimize the keywords and you have a lot more traffic coming towards your website. This ties in back into your e-commerce space because if you have a lot of traffic to your website and your search engine is optimized, obviously using keywords and allowing Google and putting ads here and there, you have an optimized way of getting to your website. A lot more people are likely to purchase your product. Another thing that you can use AI for, which is very, very interesting, is of course the use of artificial neural networks, for instance, or machine learning, to be able to segment your market. You'll be being able to crunch large amounts of data using big data mining. You would be able to know who your specific clientele is and probably tailor your products to those kind of people. You'll be able to tailor your products to the particular segment where your product is moving faster and maximize your profits from there, while also being able to understand why your preference of your product is not in a certain particular demographic that you want to get into. You could also then use that particular data mining to be able to understand why your product is not getting sold in a specific demographic and make adjustments to your formula or your product to be able to sell to those kind of demographic that you're looking at. Again, tying back into functional foods and nutraceuticals. Nicelo did this perfectly by combining pharmaceutical technology in adding probiotics, and they actually do mention that they're now using things like moringa oil and hemp to get some other pharmacological activity in their drink, particularly, and this is something that's very important, and it's an opportunity for many people in the nutritive food space. So now people are not only looking for food that's nutritious and filling, people are also looking to if they can gain some other benefits. For instance, can you get a multivitamin in your drink, for instance? That's something that would be very interesting to see in the near future. The use of sustainable and local sourced ingredients is very important on both ends of the spectrum, and it's an opportunity in the nutritive food space. You could be the person that decides to then develop the ingredients. You could decide to grow sorghum, or you could decide to grow millet in the case of the Micello side and sell to them, or you could be on the business side of the nutritive side and buy the products, the ingredients locally, which is something that's a very huge opportunity, particularly from the supplier side, which is very important because then you're feeding into the nutritive space and benefiting as a supplier rather. Corporate wellness programs are very, very important and have been popping up a lot more recently. Many corporate institutions now are basing so much of importance on the well-being of their people, and that results in the development of wellness programs. In the nutritive food space, this is a very big opportunity because you can then partner with these kind of companies to provide healthy solutions for them, tailor-made for those particular people in those corporates. And that means that you can partner with different corporate companies, and that could also help improve the product. Speaking of quality assurance, it's another space that's very important because every time you develop food that is intended for human consumption or consumption at all, it has to be of the highest quality. This is an opportunity for anyone to think of, to get into this space, to say, wait, we can be in a position to determine the quality of the food that's coming out, because in some cases the food does not meet the required criteria. South Africa has been recently plagued with problems associated with spaza shops manufacturing things in their backyards, and the quality assurance is a good space for someone to ensure that the nutritive food space remains untainted. You want to be in a position to attach yourself to international collaborators for the purposes of export. Like I said, for a business to grow, you have to jump on the opportunities of being able to grow into other economies. So an opportunity is there, particularly in the international export game, to be able to produce your product to go into different markets, and that could provide a novelty food in a different space. For instance, if you have a product that's, in the case of Micello, for instance, developed on sorghum, which may not be indigenous or highly usable in places like Australia or in India, but you could provide something that's actually absolutely new and maybe tap into a new demographic, which is absolutely amazing and is good for business. So in conclusion, the food and nutritive business landscape in South Africa, of course, many innovations coming up and a significant number of challenges. There's a lot of advances that I have mentioned earlier in this presentation, and it's something that's going to lead to healthier lifestyles, probably sustainable practices to make sure that the business does stay on its 9.9% trajectory growth rate. And of course, we have to use, there's lots of advances in the use of technology, some of which we've highlighted here using machine learning, big data mining, artificial neural networks, and such and such. So it remains important for us to remain sustainable in this development and to be able to demonstrate adaptability and commitment to meeting the evolving customer needs. This is something that's important because customer preferences change over time. And you never know, we may be hit by another pandemic and your function of food might be what keeps people healthy. You never know. Another thing that we have to remember is that amidst all of these things we have, amidst all of these opportunities, there's always going to be challenges, particularly related to nutrition education, which is something that I think should be an opportunity for people to jump on and provide more nutritional education to the South African populace. And of course, there's regulatory compliance issues that are very, very important because we do not want to have food that doesn't meet regulatory standards. Of course, it's very important for us to consider the future of South Africa's food nutritive business, and we have to strike a balance between innovations and addressing all the fundamental challenges, and this is very crucial. We also have to be in a position to be able to attack all the opportunities and maximize these. So the industry's resilience and the potential for growth are contingent upon continued research, which is very important, and it remains important for the development of mankind, obviously. Sustainable practices are very important to make sure that we do not taint the earth or provide food that is not sustainable or have a challenging supply chain. It is very important that we leverage all of these emerging opportunities by embracing technological advancements and cultivating a culture of collaboration. Very important. To collaborate reduces the costs, gets everyone forward. So that way, the South African food nutritive business can play a pivotal role in shaping a healthier and more sustainable future for the nation. Thank you so much. And now, a word from our sponsors. Thanks for chiming in.